Hi, I'm Mark Reed. Follow me as I attempt to put my new book, Impact Culture, into practice and discuss it with others taking a similar journey. You'll get tips that will help you achieve more impact from your research and stay healthy, no matter how busy you are. Rediscover your purpose. Lead from behind to empower those around you. Transform your work culture. Welcome to Season 4 of the Fast Track Impact podcast. So we've been thinking about how to evaluate and evidence our impact. And today I am delighted to be joined by a guest, Dr Rachel Blanche, Senior Lecturer in Arts Management and Cultural Policy at Queen Margaret University Edinburgh. I'll introduce Rachel properly in a moment, but I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to be able to dive into some of the deepest, most sophisticated methods that I've learned about for evaluating impact, that not only will give you compelling evidence, there'll be a richness to this data that will give you and the wider world new insights and potentially give back significantly to the people who you ultimately wanted to benefit through the evaluation process. So I met Rachel a long time ago now. I forget how many years ago it was, but I was training at QMU in Edinburgh, speaking to Rachel, and as often happens in my trainings, I discovered that I actually feel like I'm learning more from Rachel than she's learning from me. I'm sure it was a two-way process, and asked Rachel if she might then help write a paper drawing on her expertise of arts-based methods for evaluating impact. This is the 2021 paper in Research Policy that you may have read. If not, I'll put a link to this in the show notes. And Rachel made a really significant contribution to that paper, leading in particular on our coverage of those methods. But more widely than that, helping me and my co-authors to think much more deeply than we had done before about why we are evaluating things the way we are, and what the broad range of benefits of evaluation might be beyond simply the formative feedback of helping me do better, impact, and the summative feedback of telling a story to my funders or some other kind of evaluation process. So I feel I've learned a huge amount over the years. I draw on Rachel's slides and some of my own trainings. In fact, Rachel did a joint training with me earlier this year on these methods, and this is on my YouTube channel if you want to catch the full training with all of the visuals. But today I'm going to dive into some of these methods and some of the most powerful examples that Rachel talks about based on her own experience. And to do so, I'm going to first of all introduce you and welcome you to the podcast, Rachel.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm Rachel Blanche, and as Mark said, my field of expertise is arts policy and cultural management, which I've been teaching at Queen Margaret University for well over a decade now. And it's a fascinating topic, and as Mark says, full of intriguing complexities. Obviously, arts and culture being something that every single person in society can relate to, and yet as a sector, it's so multifaceted with so many different elements of work. And my research and my kind of field of study is very much around understanding the nature of art in society, but in particular how people engage with it. And over the years, I've become just more and more aware of some of the hidden values or perhaps not hidden, but values that perhaps we just take for granted, and that aren't necessarily sort of like recognizing as perhaps as much as we could, about just the impacts that people being able to express themselves in creative ways, often in non-verbal ways. There's a whole load of benefits, which I think that everyone individually can relate to, about how we engage and interact with the arts. But it's only through this paper with you, Mark, that I started to turn my attention a bit more fully to the use of art forms, creativity and expression, and the kind of commonality, that universal connection that these formats can create for us, but to view them as a form of research, and as something that we could be adding to our toolkit for trying to explore and capture and to have impacts through our research. So this has been a really fascinating kind of journey for me, and has opened up a new doorway into how I think about the arts and the ways that we can be talking about them.
Yeah, I think that there's just so much value, so much richness in all of this, and I think it's important to just stand back from this a moment and think about why we might want to use these kinds of methods. And I think there is a perception, which to an extent is valid, that if you are trying to achieve cultural impacts, then I might therefore want to use arts-based methods to capture those impacts. And yet I would argue that across many different domains, so social impacts, for example, health and well-being impacts, and the like, certainly attitudinal change, changes in understanding, perceptions and such like. So much of this stuff is actually under the surface, perhaps not hidden, as you said, but things that we just take for granted, or what we might describe as tacit or implicit knowledge. And if we can take these implicit understandings of the world, of how we might experience an intervention, for example, something that has benefit, that is an impact, and make those implicit understandings explicit in whatever way, whether verbal or non-verbal, but just, I can see these, I can appreciate these, then all of a sudden we have something far richer, far fuller, that was always there, but that we just couldn't describe before.
Yeah, and we'll be able to discuss some examples as well that can help to bring this to life in ways that we can start to imagine. Like how some of that testimony can actually then be conveyed through this medium.
Exactly, because I think this is the challenge. I don't know, you put on an exhibition and you have a visitor's book, and I've got now a clicker that says this many people visited, and I've got all these people who said, yes, this was nice, I enjoyed it. And I'm pretty convinced that something else went on here, and I hoped that people got something more out of this. But if this was something deeper, just some sense that I can't put my finger on, that I have a new understanding of my place in history, a sense of place identity, a sense of place attachment that now means I go back out into the world a new person, perceiving the world in new ways, interacting with the world in new ways. It's there. I can't put a finger on it. I can't put words to this. I'm not going to write that in the visitor's book. And yet it's there. And actually, if we could integrate some of the kind of things you're talking about into that exhibition, I might actually add to the exhibition, make it more creative, more engaging, and at the same time get some of the evidence that I ultimately might want to then show this had an impact. And in fact, by making it more explicit, the people interacting with this now get that sense of, it's not just a feeling I can't put my finger on. I get this, I understand this, and this then adds value.
Mm-hmm. I think what we're getting at is that it's about actually trying to capture meaning, and the kind of meaning that other people can relate to. And I think that's where the power of arts as everybody experience is that's where it resides. And as researchers, and particularly if we're talking about trying to demonstrate impact, like the challenge for us is being able to show what was significant about something, and just to and it's not easy when, like you say, that when you're using traditional or conventional approaches or methods towards trying to ask people what their responses are, you're not necessarily going to be able to elicit the most reflective or deep or considered response, because a lot of people haven't really verbalized those themselves, but they do. What they can report are the emotions that go along with that, and so that's where you get a lot of the enthusiasm and like people's kind of feedback. But in terms of actually trying to demonstrate impact or trying to identify meaning or what has changed in people's understanding or perspectives, this is where some of these more engaged and participative methods. So the use of art forms, like for instance photography or painting or visual arts, or performances, and kind of narrative approaches, like poetry or writing. If we build some of these approaches into the methods that we're using, then we're taking the research participants on a reflective journey with us through the experience, which at the other end of that is then going to enrich what we're able to actually evidence from it. And I think it's important to say that we're talking about using art forms as methods, but in the research that I did for our paper, I was looking very broadly across a lot of different literatures, and especially looking in disciplines beyond my own kind of conventional arts, culture, or even education remit. And I was really interested to find that a lot of what's been written about the power of using these arts-based methods comes from non-arts disciplines. Principally psychology and sociology, but also in a lot in healthcare and in healthcare settings, and including with some pretty kind of like vulnerable groups or some very sensitive health or mental health settings, but also there's papers have been written about this and the use of these methods in environmental studies, in the field of geography, anthropology, conservation, biodiversity. So I don't think that there's any limit to which discipline we can be doing research in and trying to explore impacts in. I think what's really interesting is the role that actually employing creative or expressive means, by engaging people, hands-on with art forms like this, that it can produce some very sort of deep testimony, quite meaningful ones. It can elicit many new ways of thinking, new perspectives, quite often things that nobody really expected at the beginning to come out. But as a result, it generates really enriched testimony and evidence, and can actually provide ways to really explore very deep impact.
Yeah. So just to pull out of what you said, 3 types of arts-based research methods that we might want to use, but actually many of these come and are used in very different disciplinary contexts. So visual methods, photography, painting, collage, murals, things like that. Narrative methods, secondly, poetry, fiction, comic strips, and the like. And then thirdly, performative methods, things like the use of film, theatre, dance, songs, music. And I know you're going to give us an example from one of these categories. But I think the other key thing that I took from what you're saying here is this idea of significance as meaning. And as I've argued, the process of demonstrating the significance of your impact is essentially an argument that you have to construct, an evidence-based argument that, yes, this matters. And ultimately, that is subjective. Well, it matters to me based on my values in this context at this time, but who knows what future generations might make of this, or another view, another person with a very different viewpoint might have on whether this is good or, in fact, no, that's against my interests. That's actually negative from my perspective. And so if significance is the process of creating an evidence-based argument, essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to argue that this has meaning. And to do so requires a more subjectivist approach rather than an objectivist approach that says there is one universal right answer. And it is this plurality of perspectives that I think that then enables us to do this in a sophisticated way. And this then kind of makes me start to think about some of the methods. I mean, you've talked about what you've learned from other disciplines, some of the methods that we would use in qualitative social science to determine rigour. And I think that what we're able to do now using these kinds of methods, by taking these different perspectives and comparing and contrasting and integrating or whatever, there's something about this that not only adds a richness to our narrative, but a validity and rigour to that narrative.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And and this is one of the areas in which we need to turn to qualitative research in order to try to capture more kind of nuanced and subjective testimonies. But because those are so often experiential, it can create real challenges to us, and especially in trying to demonstrate that there's a magnitude of effect, and also being able to show causation as well between what we've done or what we've researched with the experiences. And I think that the arts-based approaches that I've been learning about as well, that they've really grown up from that intersection of having to try to explore experiential kind of evidence and testimonies, but finding ways in order to be able to capture that in a very sort of meaningful way, but also to take a constructivist approach towards being able to build up understanding of what beneficiaries have been experiencing, and then to layer up and to identify where the values are in that. And by pulling together a body of evidence like this, that then does help to build significance. But I think that a key feature of what we're talking about here of the arts-based methods is also the artifact that's produced that contains that evidence, because it is able to act almost as a repository of meaning, and it in itself then conveys that significance and conveys that meaning to whoever it is that we're wanting to try to share that more widely with. So I think that's the exciting thing about using these approaches, is that not only do they enable us to actually engage with research participants in a much more kind of empowering way with them, in a way that's very participative and very meaningful in their own individual experiences. But it also then creates an output which embodies all of that meaning, which carries some of that emotion and a lot of that power, which in itself then becomes evidence.
Yeah, I wonder if you can give us an example then, just to make this a bit clearer, an output, an artifact from some of the evaluation work that you've been involved in, Rachel.
I think that one of the sort of most interesting kind of examples is, for instance, in the use of theatre, or kind of performance art in general, which can be used as a way of being able to elicit testimonies from people who've been through an experience, but then in the process of then creating a performance around it, then it then helps to allow to communicate like those findings in a very direct way from person to person, and so there's a great example of this, which we've talked about in some of our workshops. Mark, is a play called Inside Out of Mind, and it was about transforming dementia care. It was a research study which had engaged with healthcare assistants who were supporting people who were living with dementia. And so in the process of that research, they engaged and gathered a lot of evidence from people around this issue, and they then were able to portray on stage a composite of participant experiences of actually representing things that people had reported to them or had shared or had experienced, into something that then becomes quite an immersive performance way of communicating and sharing these experiences and these findings in a way that the people who are watching it and who are engaging with it are kind of carried through that journey. They're taken inside people's experiences. So something like that enables you to take beneficiaries deeper into their experiences, not only in the research process itself, but then to be able to show people and take them through the experience as well. And so here we can think of this as very kind of like immersive research knowledge. And so people who had seen this play, which took place it was actually in 2015, and it's portrayed in a journal article in the Journal of Dementia Care, which is it's in volume 23, number 1, 2015. But that article and the authors Schneider and Myers, they discuss at some length the process that they went through, but also the effects that it had for the people who were then being shared, this knowledge. And so the people, not only did the research participants themselves feel that they were able to articulate a lot of very kind of profound and deep personal feelings around this issue. They could share stories and concerns, but also to see how their experiences fitted in within a wider kind of collective experience. But for the audiences as well, having been taken through this, this experience as well, for them to be able to then talk about the impact of that research on them, they could express their responses in a much kind of like deeper and a bit more immediate and personal way. So this kind of empowers and all like the research. It and when we're trying to get evidence and testimony and details from people, that it brings it into a realm which enables for us to conceptualize and to articulate experiences in a much more kind of reflective and yet individual way. And yet, what we end up with as a play also represents collective testimony as well, and something that that will continue to then be able to communicate, like the meaning of these findings in a very powerful way. So, I mean, there's an example there, and theatre is used a lot quite commonly for this form of data elicitation and then knowledge translation. But we can see how it can help us to create sort of like very clear causation between our research findings, and then how it's changed people's perceptions, or like what kind of impacts it's had on them.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful example, isn't it? And I think what's fascinating for me actually is that contrast between the individual and the collective. I did some research a few years ago now with Dr. Jasper Kenter, and he's an ecological economist, and we were doing evaluations around values for nature. And contrasting people's individual valuation in pounds and pence and in qualitative terms of an intervention in nature compared to the collective evaluation. And we found that after people had gone through a process of deliberating and come to a group answer, the group answer was actually different to just aggregating up all of the individual answers. And in fact, when you went back to individuals afterwards and say, do you stand by what you originally said, you discover people have actually changed their views as a result of that interaction. And it's this idea that values are not something which are just kind of innate, that are there within us all, that you just have to access. Yet there is a basis for those, perhaps in our kind of deeper values and beliefs. But ultimately, when I ask someone to express how they value something, this is something which is a cognitive process that they then come up with through deliberation, through comparison with other perspectives, bits of evidence, etc. And those values actually form. And it strikes me that there's actually a process of helping people to articulate and form their own individual positions through that collective endeavour. And that contrast somehow says something. I'm not quite sure. What are your thoughts on that contrast between the individual and the collective in that example?
Well, I think that there's real sort of like power in being able to recognize that your individual experience, while obviously unique to you, is also something that maps across to what other people are experiencing as well. And as researchers, in particular, I think this is where it really helps to be able to just go beyond kind of individual kind of like anecdotes and individual very kind of contextualized testimonies, to be able to show kind of like broader, more universal elements of experience. I mean, another example which I find just so exciting as a as an example of the ways in which we can use some of these methods to lead people deeper through their experiences and to try to to stimulate sort of like really kind of like deep insights and deep thinking about a question is a project which took place just a few years ago, run by one of my colleagues at Queen Margaret University, Dr. Rac, who's an arts researcher. He does practice-based research. And this was working with people, again, within a healthcare setting, so with very much a non-arts setting, and working to first of all, as part of the first phase of this project was to explore and to understand osteoporosis. Which is a condition of kind of vulnerability and fragility with people's sort of skeletal structure, with the bones, and so teaming up with this in this non-art setting with a project which was called the Lydia Osteoporosis Project. So that's a healthcare setting. They had gathered data about showing that there was an issue of needing to care carefully for people with these vulnerabilities. But then the creative element then which came in was working with practitioners, with health carers, working with people with this condition, to creatively engage them around these issues, and then to explore some of these findings from the research, which showed that there were where there were risks. And so the purpose was to try to develop more kind of education and insights for practical purposes amongst frontline caring staff. But what Anthony and his sort of creative research partner Alice did was that they they worked in a creative way with nurses and frontline care workers to actually get them to think through how they work with their patients, how they collaborate with their patients, and a lot of the activities they have to do. And so they were using lots of kind of creative tools, like pen, paper, color, form, and they came up with the idea of using tissue paper to bind their limbs. Making what kind of, we can imagine like being like an exoskeleton, around the outsides of the legs and the arms and on their backs. And then actually, trying to do their normal nursing tasks, like helping someone in and out of a jacket, or kind of, like helping someone up, moving people around, performing, a lot of the kind of healthcare tasks that they do, but without trying to rip this tissue paper. And by putting themselves into that embodiment, and actually, like trying to be the patient and recognizing, some of these real kind of fragilities, it put them into a state of embodied cognition, where they were very deeply having to question their own approaches, their own assumptions. And what this did was enabled a lot of tacit knowledge to become explicit. And so, it represented, another kind of like deep kind of method, but very much involving action and then reflection as well on the part of these practitioners. And what it meant was that there was a lot of new understandings came to light for this group of practitioners. Within their field, in how to relate to what was kind of research data about this condition, but then how to actually create change in their practice. And this is an example of where an arts-based method like this can add real value, much more value than more kind of traditional qualitative tools like questionnaires or interviews, surveys. Actually getting people to be enacting and exploring in a very creative way their normal practice, the perspectives of the people that they're working with. And this then deepened, created some very deep insights, and then impacts on going forward on the practice. And so as a result of these workshops, that project was then able to generate a whole load of sort of take-home messages, but also resources that could be shared across the profession, about how to sort of navigate the way around some of these issues, and encouraging people to be putting themselves much more into the position of their patients. And so this is where we can see how these kind of creative methods can help us to experience the aesthetic part of an issue or of people's experiences. It very much empowers research participants, but also bringing in a lot of these other perspectives, these multiple voices and perspectives onto an issue. And it's another example as well about how working with artists and doing something quite unconventional can actually open up the door to completely new ways of thinking, quite radical questioning sometimes. But by doing that, you then elicit a whole load of very unexpected and, quite deep layers of meaning. As well as being able to bring together multiple testimonies, we're talking about a group of people, of lots of different practitioners, like all putting themselves through experience like this, which then can create something which stands as a single kind of artifact, a single example. With the images, the videos that have come out of this workshop, as well as all of the practical and professional resources.
Yeah, I think what I love about this is the richness of the feedback and how you close that loop. And I think we often think about formative feedback as being for us, as the researchers. How can I do better research impact? How could I design a better pathway in future? How could I work more respectfully, more effectively with partners and such like? And yes, there's that. But actually, the formative feedback in this goes to the participants themselves. And this is more than just, well, we did a survey and now we've written a report and here you go, there's some important suggestions or recommendations, which probably nobody reads. You cannot help but learn from that, because that learning is embodied in your experience of the evaluation. And as you learn and gain new insights and share them, others learn from you. There's this collective learning experience. And of course, you as a researcher get to learn from that as well. And it puts me in mind of a learning model, triple loop learning, which suggests that the single loop learning, I cognitively, I got something, I learned something, I can recall it. Great, we get that. But double loop learning then is that I then relook at this and I question the assumptions underpinning what I thought I'd learned, and I start to learn in new ways. And then the triple loop learning is actually standing back from the whole process to understand what it means to learn and rethinking how we learn and what knowledge even is, for example. And I think in this example, you can see all three of those loops potentially playing out for some of those participants, which means this can be a transformational experience. You leave that evaluation a new person, seeing and interacting with the world in a new way.
Absolutely. And not only that, but, it's much easier to be able to show direct causation between your research and the intervention that you did. And then, some of those kind of like really, really deep and long lasting changes. Because, like you say, people have not just conceptually engaged with something. They've engaged with it experientially as well. And it's become part of their own lived experience or their professional approach. This is why I'm very fascinated and continue to be fascinated by the opportunities to actually explore some of these approaches more deeply and in a kind of a methodological kind of way as well, to understand what it is about these about engaging somebody very in a creative or an expressive or experiential way through these kinds of methods, in order to be able to capture their experiences, which is essentially what we're trying to do when we're trying to establish if impact has taken place. But also, it's very clear that by virtue of using these kinds of methods, taking people on these journeys, you have forward impact as well. So we've got two examples here where you started with wanting to try and investigate a topic. You gather data, and usually through creative means, but then in the way that you're then sharing that data or exploring the kind of meaning and importance and impact that data has, using some of these creative methods, it then does hit people very, very sort of deeply, because of the interactive and the participatory nature of the way that they're engaged. It empowers people as well to engage with data in their own very subjective way. And then what comes out the other side is both sort of deeply personal, but very enriched as well, having gone deeper than just a simple dissemination of information would have gone, but at the same time stands as having sort of more applicable or more kind of like universal sort of value and significance as well. So I do find it very, very sort of fascinating. I do sometimes feel like I get myself caught in a bit of a loop, though, in thinking about where does the arts-based method start, where does it end? Are we talking about eliciting data or having data? Because once you start to engage in these kinds of ways, all sorts of things start to happen. But there's no doubt that it really enriches the process and creates something that's very memorable, experienceable, and very communicable to others as well as an artifact.
Yeah, I think it is. It's messy, it's complicated, it's not linear. You're not quite sure where, the evaluation stops, the research begins, and now the impact starts again. And and I think if you're listening to this and thinking, I was quite keen on this until I realised that because this is not going to fit into any of the boxes that my funders want, or I want to make a case study for something like the Research Excellence Framework. How do you fit it into those boxes? And my experience of this is that once you do this, you've got so much richness of evidence upon impact, upon evidence, upon impact, that then the task is just to now simplify, linearize, put it into the boxes. You can do that. And you can still tell an authentic narrative that draws on this. But the result is something far richer. And as you said, really clearly communicable, done well. This can have real narrative power and visual power. You can integrate this into your case study, into your evaluation.
Yeah, and it has a lot of value for public engagement as well, for being able to share more widely in a very relatable way and a very non-academic way the findings and like what research is about, what it's accomplished, and the kinds of impacts it's had. And so again, it's not linear, but maybe if we think about it as at the end of a process of actually then being able to have very accessible ways of being able to support what your conventional kind of outputs are in terms of journal articles and academic outputs, with something that's kind of very visual or and accessible. I think it's really important, to maybe summarize, from the reading that I did, across the arts-based methods sort of literature. Kind of I looked at many literature reviews within different academic disciplines, as well as examples of where often non-arts academics had used these methods in their areas. And in our research paper about the different methods for evaluating impact, we do summarize a number of different themes that came up through that, and I think it's worth just quickly kind of like reiterating what those are now, because I think that they summarize key themes and some of the examples we've been talking about. But I mean, some of the main benefits really about these methods that come up through literature on this topic are obviously that it's participative. So what it means is that you're actively engaging research subjects in exploring issues and in generating the data. And in that sense, we're really empowering our research subjects, and they get something back from the process as well. These methods enable us to promote forms of understanding that are very empathetic, and I think that's part of what makes them so communicable. A lot of these different approaches give us a deep insight personally into what others are experiencing, and that's essentially what arts do in society. But what we're creating as testimony can also be very symbolic, and I think it's important to mention that it might not necessarily be through language. It might be through people's things that they've produced in terms of music or sort of painting, photography, and in that sense we can capture emotional and aesthetic elements of people's experiences. And that's really important, especially if you're dealing with vulnerable groups or very, very sensitive issues of trauma, or things that you don't want to be invasive about with your research subjects, and yet it can be very empowering for them to be able to be heard non-verbally, or through the medium of something that's really quite safe and non-threatening, like art. And in this sense, then we can gather the perspectives from very many perspectives. So it's very pluralist. We can actually incorporate a multiplicity of perspectives and voices into the research. And, all of these things are, really, really important elements in trying to show meaningful and significant impact from research. As you said, Mark, earlier, like these methods are quite subtle. They're implicit. They can capture quite intangible meanings, and often things that people wouldn't necessarily think to articulate, which might otherwise have gone unrecorded.
Yeah, what a great summary to conclude. We are sadly out of time at this point, and I want to just wrap things up and thank you for this, Rachel. I think what we have here is just this really rich. I had the word toolbox. There's more a cornucopia of methods that we can use to evaluate impact in ways that are rich, that are diverse, that are rigorous, and crucially that give back, that empower people, that actually generate more impact, more benefit. I would love the opportunity to continue this conversation, and both of us, Rachel and I, have been looking for an opportunity to follow up our paper, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm going to just put this out there off the cuff. If you're looking to do an evaluation using these methods, who knows? If Rachel and I have time, maybe that's something that we could help design with you, and then co-author and write up, and maybe that's the next step. But I'll conclude by just suggesting whether or not you ever get back in touch with the two of us, and I'll put links to Rachel's bio, her that paper, and the other things that she's linked to in what she's said. I encourage you to explore, be creative, playful, have fun, try these things out, because I can guarantee that these are going to take you on a journey that will expand your mind. So thank you, Rachel. It has been an absolute pleasure having this conversation. I look forward to continuing our dialogue, our professional relationship, as we continue to explore these ideas together. And I hope that you all will enjoy putting some of this stuff into practice.